Welcome to Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, here as always on Saturdays with Jen, the Arcane Observer. And tonight we're going to talk about examples of levitation and or telekinesis and other possibly amazing abilities that people may have had throughout time. As always, you can find all episodes of the show, along with links to social media, ways to listen to the show, and ways to support the show over at the podcast page, the website, actually. I'm so used to saying podcast page still. That's going to take a while to break that habit. And that is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. And please also, when you check out the episode description for all these shows, go and please check out all the links there for friends of the show that help make all these shows, including, of course, Jen, the Arcane Observer, and Michael Strange, and Trouble Minds Radio, and the Trouble Minds Radio Network, KUAP, Digital Broadcasting, where you can hear all of our shows that are part of the network over there playing 24/7. So it's an amazing resource just to, even if you just want things to have playing in the background while you're doing whatever else you have to do. So yeah, that takes care of that. And a lot of these shows recently, these Saturday shows, have been continuations or branches off of topics from the previous show. And this is an example of that. But before we get into that, I want to, of course, bring in the co-host of the show. Jen, welcome, and thank you for joining me as always.
Hey, James, how are you doing? It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm okay. This is, I think it's a huge topic. I don't know if we'll cover everything, if we ever can cover everything, even in a series of shows. But at least we can get an overview of it, I think. So
yeah, we just keep it going, and there's always new things coming up and new things to talk about. And so that's one thing easily to be appreciated. I enjoy it, and thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I did find some articles and I put them in the chat, and so I had heard of so Jen, you had mentioned before some of the examples of saints and other figures in the Catholic or Christian religions levitating, but I found this article. It's from let me see here, Encyclopedia dot UK or something like that. I have the link in the chat here, but it mentions different parts of the world, different places where this levitation or ability to lift oneself up or other objects up with the mind has been practiced or developed over time. At least examples of it. So I can go over some of those real quick and to get us started here, because I think it's a good way to get into this, to sort of show that it's not just restricted to one part of the world or one time period of the world either. So I can get into that, but if you have any initial thoughts, you're welcome to go into them first.
Oh, I think that'd be great, though, to hear some of what you found about it and everything. I think there is definitely untapped energy just in the potential, not necessarily in potential, but just that all creatures, there's something about their abilities of how they interact with their natural environment. I think with humanity, a lot of that's maybe regressed, or there's possibility that there's a mutations of how they have progressed, that they have lost some of these, or they might be regressive genes, essentially, and it can be tapped into, but certain things trigger it, and then they are hard to shut back off again. I think when it does happen, and it explains a lot of paranormal phenomenon in that case, a lot of occasions. But I'd like to hear what you found in the articles too.
Yeah, I do agree. I think a lot of views from society about whether all that kind of stuff can exist in the first place has also played a role in, and of course, and just with in sort of making people less willing to even try to do that, or if they have those abilities already, then it makes them want to hide them and not use them more. I think in a lot of places around the world. But so I think that's another factor
Possibility.
as well. Yeah. So this article starts off talking about shamanism, and this and so levitation says it's thought to be involved in the journey to the spirit world, and it's says that here that the first shaman was said to have been chosen. I'm sorry, said to have been closest to the gods, um, and so therefore shared much of their abilities or their power, and including the power to levitate. And these different shamanistic traditions, again among parts of the world, agree that levitation and other paranormal powers, as some people will call them, are caused by spirits. But then, of course, that makes you wonder, how is that happening through the person? So is it really other spirits, or is it the person sort of just tapping into energy, as we were talking about there? It says among the, let me see here, Tungus, Tungus people, a shaman is actually chained to the ground in order to stop them from levitating in some places. So also in getting to the idea, or to the times when there were missionaries that would go from place to place. A Father Paul Lejeune, Lejeune, Legune, said that levitation happened among Native Americans in Canada in the 1630s, and Australian Aborigines, those people from Australia, there, the ones that were originally there, have been reported practicing levitation, this ability, apparently throughout time, as have some African tribes. So again, this is just different parts of the world here. That's just the one example. There's in some cases one Zulu witch doctor was seen levitating another person 3 feet off the ground. So it's not just always the individual lifting themselves. It's them lifting other objects, or even in some cases other people. So let me see here. We'll just go through one more section here, and then we'll take a break and talk more about all this. But also, I had not heard of this, but in voodoo, the practices of voodoo, there was a let's see here. I'm not sure how you say his name. Gersi, Gersi, who has apparently studied Haiti, different people in Haiti, and he had apparently seen people levitating that he could not explain. And as in with other cases of religious levitation, these things happened during a period of meditation and or some kind of a trance, which I have heard is common among a lot of different people around the world who have had these levitation and or just paranormal experiences in general in some cases. Gersi saw a woman jumping in the air and floating 12 feet in front of him. That's quite a distance. And when he tried to take the picture, now this is fascinating as well. When he tried to take pictures of these events, his camera batteries consistently died on him. They lost all power. Even if he was able to take a picture of some of these levitation events, the pictures came out totally black or completely blurred and out of focus. So that's amazing to me, because that just implies some kind of energy transfer or manipulation that is, of course, we've heard about this with cameras, where different things, whether it's ghosts or cryptids or UFOs or whatever, have weird effects on devices and cameras and make them malfunction. So really amazing how there's so many connections to a lot of things here. So go ahead on that, Jen, if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that, things lend to it. There's abnormal oscillation of neurons in the brain that might lend to it, of why this would occur. I think it is induced to some extent, these types of experiences, by altered states of just the way that the brain waves are operating could lend to it. The ability to levitate other people is really interesting. There's accounts of, in different rituals and things like that, and even some childhood rituals people may remember, like light as a feather, stiff as a board, or when they will literally put someone in a chair and do a similar thing, where they're levitating the individual up off the ground, and then they begin to float off, and there have been accounts of that where, like, the chair itself hovers in the air and even moves upward so many feet. And some different accounts people have made about doing those things. But it's all got to do typically with, like, there's chanting involved. There's a repetitive, and there's a sort of just the idea of it being conceivable that it will happen, an open-mindedness to that it does occasionally happen. And this is actually, you see this with Ouija boards, you see this with seances, where there are phenomenon that occur, and you don't know if it's coming from the spirit realm, literally from the spirits of the dead, or if it's coming from the individuals that are involved, just in the event itself. But I think that it has something to do with that you have to sort of transition into it in a way. But then there are occasions where it happens when it's like a sudden shock event, where, like in the case that something should move across the room unexpectedly. But there's always sort of a prelude to that. There's always a feeling people describe, typically of being watched, or they're experiencing that kind of feeling. That in itself could be a power of the mind, that there's something, that they are outside themselves, or there's something else outside of themselves. And I often wonder too, just on a side note, the natural laws as we think of them, how flexible they might be. And there are a lot of events that go unexplained as far as how, people nearly escape certain events, or they have precognition of something that's fixing to happen. And there's no reason to explain it. They have no, experience with, they're not necessarily like a psychic or anything like that, but there's sort of a precognition experience where they have an intuitive gut reaction that somehow does aid, or it's a pretense to something that does actually occur. They could say that they felt that something was going to happen, or there was a deja vu experience. And I think deja vu would really tie into that in a way, of a mystery into itself. But levitation, in general, it seems to be induced a lot of times, some would say in a lot of previous stories I've read about or heard about, by other spirits, and in other occasions, that is induced through some type of altered state of mind, and not by any means at all. It could be something as much as just the chanting and repetitiveness, and the person going into a sort of hypnotized state. So hypnosis seems to play like a really big role in it, altering the way that the mind is thinking.
Yeah. Regarding the precognition thing there, that is something, I think that's another ability that I think there's a lot of different abilities that we can have, or we have at different times, maybe not other times. There was, I forget what it was, maybe a year or so ago, maybe longer. I had this one night where I just had this feeling that, like, things were wrong. Something was wrong. There was multiple things that were wrong, but they weren't wrong for me in my personal space, but I just had this really weird feeling. And then over the next couple of days, I had found out from another person that I knew that a couple of their cats had actually, like, died within a day of each other, just because they were just from natural death. They were old cats. So that happened with them. I had another friend around the same time who had, I believe it was a relative of theirs that was older, pass away. There were just these 2 or 3 things that happened that were happening at the same time. I was having this weird feeling that, of course, I didn't find out about right away. But when I traced it back to the time period of when it's apparently happened and when I had that feeling, it all lined up. And I have no idea. I've never had that before or since. But it was the weirdest thing, and so I do wonder about that. Also, another funny quick story. I do think things can happen while people are just, I don't know. It's funny because now I'm thinking about it. This was years ago. I was at my grandparents' house visiting my grandma, and we were just sitting there and listening to TV and talking here and there, and or watching TV, and we were sitting in the living room, and we heard something in the dining room, just a small something hitting the table, and there had been a plate with an orange, just a leftover orange, in this plate, and it was one of those plates that had um, a raised edge where it tilted up slightly. So there's no way anything could have just rolled off the plate. And this orange had just slowly been pushed or moved off the plate and landed on the table. And we have no idea how that happened because we were the only ones there. And there was no, I mean, the windows were all closed. There was no way it could be a breeze. It had to be a heck of a breeze to blow an orange off of a plate and not do anything else. And I don't know, it makes me think now because I was just thinking there was no reason for that, but we were very much relaxed and just, I don't know, maybe there was something to do with that as well, but maybe not. And I think that's what's so makes all this so hard to figure out is that I think there's, as I always say, there's so many factors in how all this works that, I have no idea what happened that day, but that is an example of something being moved somehow through some other natural force. So, looking at the chat here, that's funny. Hadn't even looked at the chat, but Matt Hall says a disturbance in the force. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, looking at the chat here again. Let's see here. Sonia Zabat says my sister went on a haunted tour and felt sick. Yeah, I've heard of that as well in some places. And so yeah, it's I also see the other chat there. I won't read that comment, but yeah, so I think there's a lot of this here. So let me get into the next couple of sections in this account here, this article here. So next it goes to Hinduism. It says levitation has been noted among people in India, the Brahmins in India. It says that in the earliest canonical work of Hinduism, the Rig Veda, I'm probably saying that incorrectly. There's reference to sages that would ride with a rush of the wind and sail through the air, seeing appearances spread out below, as in seeing the world basically spread out below them. So let's see here. So yeah, there's other examples of this. Apparently, people have seen the monks there, or the Brahmins there, in their temple. They first. Now this is a fascinating detail here. I wonder what this does to everything. They first bathed and anointed themselves with a certain drug, which I'm guessing they means some kind of natural element, because I mean, at the time you didn't have the kind of drugs that we have now necessarily. But and then they would, with their, I'm guessing they say their rods, so their staffs or whatever, they would strike the earth with these rods or these staffs, and they would raise up in the air after this. So, and this is from, let's see here, a Flavius Philostratus, so an ancient figure. And so yeah, so also this is another factor too. I wonder how often this is the case. He mentions that the Brahmins did not brag about or boast about their powers, because it was not that was not what you were supposed to do, apparently. In yogic tradition in Hinduism, unusual abilities are said to manifest themselves on their own, apparently. So even though, And then, of course, it says that practitioners are discouraged from seeing these abilities as a source of pride, and so that's part of why they don't brag about these things, which I think is maybe another factor in all this. Just you don't want to be sort of making yourself out to be more than you are. The idea is that these powers are somehow some things that everyone can attain, in that from that point of view there. And this goes from levitation to psychic abilities such as telepathy and precognition. All these things that seem to be connected to the mind, to this their consciousness anyway. So and it goes on with Buddhism and Taoism, and a lot there. Let's see here. So yeah, sort of similar things, similar ideas about the masters of martial arts. That again, this could be, these could lead to levitation as well. So, but yeah, so it's I think there's probably a lot of reasons why people could sort of either hide their abilities or just not want to share them with everyone. But then you still get these reports because they share them with certain people that they feel that they can be trusted with the knowledge of this. So, but yeah, and there's a lot more. The next section is on the whole Christianity and their history of that. So, but I had no idea there were all these other parts of the world. And it makes sense to me because again, this is all about people and these abilities. That there would be different people all around the world at different times accessing these abilities. So that's sort of, to me, is an amazing thing. I don't know what you think about all that, Jen, as well.
Well, I think that, you want to keep it. I think a lot of times they are being humble and there is no show or boast about it. There's some theories that this energy is coming from these types of elementals or some type of invisible, unseen entities of some sort, and that there is some type of relationship with them, with the individual and with them. And there's an agreement of sorts that if they reveal or if they are too boastful, that they will retract that. In other occasions, it sounds like these, and that's talking about the same scenario, that there's an agreement between the individual, the host, and this certain entity or these certain types of entities that are not necessarily human, but might be. But there's an agreement about help with certain circumstances, and there's an exchange going on of some kind. And in that case, that could explain a lot of it, of why you would keep it secret, because it would be at the will of the entity itself that they are superstitious. I've heard a lot of occasions that these type of folk, these entities are they have certain rules that wouldn't make sense to humans, in a way, that you can only do this at this certain time or this at that certain way. I've heard stories like that. Then there are other occasions where, of course, if you were to find yourself in some way, although you wouldn't pursue some of these different skill sets unless you maybe were setting out with that intention, which they call that like a golden chain, the individual setting out to accomplish or to achieve this certain goal of maybe becoming some sort of empowered super energy thing, that it is withheld from them. So there's this sort of intuitive concept that this is coming from something else, and that it is gifted upon, or it is graced upon already at birth. These, in a lot of cases with saints and things like that, is achieved through a great deal of hardship. I've heard of that. So I think it's talking about a lot of times, the things that I have read, a relationship with these unseen entities that are influencing that. Now, on the general lay of the land, as far as looking at the human being, that it is not simply an animal. We see things that seem to be I guess you'd call it like preternatural instincts in some creatures, that they have these incredible natural abilities that seem to be almost supernatural abilities. And in humans, I don't think we understand the full context of what the original natural human may have looked like or what their abilities would have been, because we are so far away from that now. With no leaning on or any need for it, it dies out. So if there were inclinations of instinctual things, or if the gut reaction is the last thing left, and that is slowly being lost as well, it'd be hard to imagine what it all started out with, of understanding just even things as simple as scent being suppressed in such a way, all the senses being enhanced, multiple fold, and that being expressed through just survival. And when you snuff that out with so much comfort, as we see today, it could be laying low in the instinctual boundaries of the human mind and everything. Now, would that include such things as levitating? I don't know about that, but if you take into context that the Earth may have been a very different planet at one point, so if you have the idea that there may have been a different gravitational flux on the Earth, and that's very likely, that things were quite a bit different on the Earth at different points in time in history, that we could still have that as a regressive gene. There's some sort of way that you would interact, and that could have something to do with dowsing as well. So if an individual is aware that of being at a certain location, which is often described, that you need to be in a certain location at a certain time, I've heard of that. People being able to do it at will are usually described as some type of god and revered as such, or a saint of some kind. And that draws very negative attention, and they often find themselves in very bad places. Many of the accounts of the saints that have done such acts as this, at least in the accounts that I have read, and that would include even if you were looking outside of Christianity, if you want to call it that, that the same sort of curse comes to them where people are afraid of it. And they don't know if they should make it out to be demon possession or possession by the Holy Spirit. And this is often the case, and those individuals fall into bad hands a lot of times and meet really horrible fates. So there's many reasons to keep it secret, if that was the case, or if there was any type of paranormal experiences of any kind, that they'd be aware of that was a danger for them, I think.
Yeah. It's really amazing how modern fiction sort of can has these ideas that probably go way back so much further than we ever imagined. Makes me think of a big thing with the Marvel Comics and the X-Men. People hate and fear what they can't understand. And this idea that they don't know in the comics, they don't know how people are getting all these powers. And they figure that anyone that has this much power, they must not be human, or they must not be able to decide between right and wrong. And it's making me think too about another tangent here. If the planet was different with different gravity or different energy fields, different levels of energy, I could see how any kind of even just minor levitation abilities could aid people in survival in terms of using their tools and or weapons for hunting. I'm just imagining someone tossing a spear or something, or pushing a spear at a giant animal, and somehow, whether they realize it or not, I wonder now in some cases, if they use their energy or their consciousness to give their tools or their weapons sort of more force, more momentum behind them. So if they physically use the object, and then as it's getting closer to their target, it moves faster because of a boost from, again, their minds or their own body manipulating the natural energies around them. And I wonder how often those abilities, because if you think about it, doing these doing these amazing displays of power would be one thing to do, and just to see if it's possible, and then to show that it's possible. But then how would that be used? What would you, I mean, if you were in a time where you had to defend yourself from other people and or find animals or other objects in nature and use them to survive, why wouldn't you want to use any ability you had to help with that?
Right. I
So
just think that I don't
yeah,
know if there are any people walking around right now that I think that a lot of the abilities are constant. I don't think it's necessarily something as dramatic as literal levitation, but in many cases of people involving themselves with speaking with the dead and things like that, and actually actively pursuing that, they have these certain types of experiences where objects do levitate and move, but it is tied in with communication with the dead. And I have seen that, and that's a heavy account, and there's a taboo about that. And I think that that is why it's so secreted away. Even in the Christian faith, when you are calling upon the powers of prayer, you're calling upon technically an entity that is from the deep beyond. And when even in other cases in different sects, they are communicating with the deceased, even in the instances of communicating with saints and appealing to them for whatever. In the case of Simon Magus was a magician, and that was a levitation that was witnessed by many. It was witnessed in the court of Nero, where Simon Magus climbed up onto a tower and levitated off of that tower in front of Nero. And this was accounted by many historians that he did do this. And he fell from levitation in front of everyone, and that's how he died. And it was accused that he was using the power of demons when he levitated, and that actually he fell because there was, I think it was John and Paul were praying against the demons that were allowing him to levitate in front of Nero. Nevertheless, he performed the feat, at least, and made it into history for it, and that is the account of his death, of how he actually died. And he's not the only saint. There are many saints that are mysterious, that they communicated with animals and had the power over animals. And you see this too in many different mythologies around the world, the ability to communicate basically with animals, other individuals, and then that they are able to also sometimes defy natural laws. But we cannot define natural laws because we are relying on a science that is only a few hundred years old. So I do not really take a lot of stock in natural law as we understand it, because I do not think that we could possibly understand it, you know, being so early in the game of understanding it and not taking into context the full extent of what has, and just throwing away the past as they have described it. So I don't think there's any way to know or what the usefulness of levitating would be. I think that levitation is almost an accident that happens as a byproduct of something else happening. And so it's because it's not good to, you know. So I
yeah,
don't know
like,
if you know what I mean?
yeah. Our bodies are not designed for that. They're designed to be in contact with other things, with the ground,
Exactly.
with water, with
That's exactly.
yeah, yep, yeah. I agree. It's I don't remember, I don't know what it was, because I have this memory, and I'm guessing it was either an out of body experience or just a dream, although it felt very real because I felt it. Um, I have this memory of being able to touch my ceiling in my apartment once with my hand and not feeling the floor beneath my feet. And I don't know where that comes from. I'm guessing it was, like I said, an out of body and or just and possibly a combination of that and a dream experience. And I didn't like it. Like I remember I wanted it to be over as soon as I realized what had happened, And so yeah, I do think that sort of act of separating from the ground. I mean, it's like I imagine that it'd be like being in space where you there's no, the gravity is completely different. I guess really too, if you think about it, levitation is sort of I don't know, messing with gravity in a way. So, but yeah, so this article here, this next section is a bigger one, and this is on cases of levitation in Christianity, and says a lot of these are found in the Roman Catholic tradition. Says that one person that saw some of these experiences, Father Herbert Thurston, found evidence in cases of Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Dominic, and Saint Ignatius of Loyola to be weak. Thurston was more persuaded by the case of Saint Teresa of Avila, who apparently she wrote an autobiography of her own experiences, and to where she spontaneously levitated, even though she didn't like this. Again, going back to what we were just talking about. And there were other, of course, things that happened with her as well. And this has been witnessed by other people as well when this happened with her. Other religious figures, it says, who were said often to levitate include the 17th century nun. I'm going to just go with the middle and last name here, Maria. It's either Vianney or Villani, and then Saint Philip Neri. So this is something that's been documented. But also this one I know you mentioned before, the case of let's see here, that of Saint Joseph. Joseph of Cupertino says that as a young man he decided to practice extreme asceticism, going into such habits as putting poor tasting powder on his food, to just other things, basically not it's a term, and I have to look it up to know exactly what it means, but just not allowing himself to, I guess, really enjoy or be comfortable in a lot of ways there. As we were talking about, it says that he was seen by many witnesses flying into the air when meditating. And some of these flights are said to be 6 or 7 feet over the ground. Let's see here. On one time, or one occasion, the High Admiral of Castile and his wife said they saw Joseph fly 30 or 40 feet above their heads. And another, he was said to fly high above a church altar. And keep in mind, a lot of these churches, depending on where you're at, their interiors are built so that the entire room is there is that much space. There's like a good, I don't know. Some churches have their inner space is like 2 stories tall instead of 1 story tall, but it's all one room. So also, this led to charges against him that believed this to be these abilities to be caused by demonic forces. But it says that Pope Benedict the 11th was experienced at debunking fakers, and he was impressed by the number and quality of witnesses, and claimed that Joseph had indeed levitated on a number of occasions. So basically, going against the demonic thing. So, and it goes into a lot more examples here, but this is just in that part of the world, or in that belief system. But also the article here mentions Islam as well, where it's referred to as flight. So they don't even use the word levitation, but they use just the term flight. And they say figures in that belief system that were able to do this were, of course, the Prophet Muhammad, the 12th century Persian dervish Haydar, and followers of a Sufi branch there, and the 9th century Muslim saint. I hadn't heard of Muslim saints, but that's because I don't know a lot about all these religions. And the name there is way too. I'm not going to try to say that one. I apologize. But and the fascinating thing about this to me is this goes throughout all time, leading up to the modern spiritualism practices, and going into the 1800s and 1900s. So these things have continued throughout time until now. And so that's really amazing. And there's articles about more recent things like that as well. But I really wanted to focus, at least in this show, mostly just on older things because I've shared accounts on the show from other people who've had experiences seeing objects or figures just rise up into the air. And so this is not something that I don't think this has ever really completely stopped. So, and I'm sure you probably heard of accounts like that as well, Jen, from your own research.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one personal experience I had, and typically this was always, in my experiences that I had, they were usually involved with that there was already engagement in seance or in some type of that had happened prior to that or was in the midst of it or had been happening. And on one occasion, I remember just sitting at my table in the kitchen, and there was a glass that had ice in it, ice water, and had been sitting there visiting with a friend of mine, and one of the doors off the dining room area that led off into an unfinished porch that was mostly used for storage had popped open. And this was late in the middle of the night, but the door had just opened up, and that was the first thing that was odd because it was a well-closing door. And then it wasn't much longer after that that one of the ice cubes in the glass in front of me came up out of the glass onto the table by itself. And I remember that it was startling. It was really bizarre. And there were other occasions where things just would move. You would hear something happening in the other room, and you would go and see that something had changed in the room, that something had fallen or something had broken. And then there were occasions where doors were really a frequent thing. On one occasion, there was an upstairs door that didn't just open and close, but it literally opened and not by a draft, because it would open and closed repeatedly, like a flapping wing or something. It was like over and over again, opening and closing for several moments. And then there were these occasions where I would see things like this or would encounter things like this. There was another occasion where there was a lamp, and this was during a Ouija board session, where once asked for some kind of confirmation outside of the board that the cable to the lights had went out, and the room was lit by a lamp. And looking at the lamp, the plug to the outlet had been yanked completely out of the wall, and the whole probably 4-foot cable was out in the middle of the room. It had just been pulled completely out of the wall and then was laying away on the other side of the lamp. And that's what had caused it to go off. But it was completely impossible that it had happened. And then I had an experience with ball lightning, which was really bizarre, which is something for another sort of topic, but essentially it was just it's a phenomenon. Now I call it ball lightning, but at the time I had no idea what it was. And beyond that, I'm not even sure if actually it was ball lightning. It was just this impossible sort of thing that was happening. Wherein there was like just a manifestation of like a ball of light about the size of like a maybe between a softball and something slightly larger than that, just visually manifested itself in front of about I guess about 5 individuals, including myself. And it was a very incredible phenomenon. And it's weird with these sorts of things because you don't hold on to them. I mean, that was years ago. You sort of just, it's weird the way that people kind of react to it. Now, I was open to these sorts of experiences because I just was inclined to be interested in it and already accepting of the idea of it. And I think that as far as levitation and things like that, I haven't, beyond with the, I haven't seen anything that could completely defy entirely. I mean, it's one thing to say that something moved on its own or that something was moved by something else. But to see something just float up off the ground, which is often depicted so many times, in not just films or anything of the kind, but in accounts of it happening and why it would be happening, I think it's got to be something to do with the shifting of just the gravitation, as you were saying. That's something to do with the way that we think of gravity, that something is affecting the magnetic field, that for some reason in particular, and I've always thought that maybe it had something to do with the way that the brain is operating and the way that that is influencing it. But it's so complicated. If you were to go that direction with it, I don't know where it would end as far as trying to understand it. But is it happening due to evil spirits or good spirits? And what difference does it make? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'll never forget one of Michael Strange's shows, Trouble Minds Radio, where I think it was you were talking with him, or at least you were one of the calls, and you were all talking about how this idea just blew me away because it opens up so many possibilities. How the planet, the further back you go, the energy field, the electromagnetic fields, and just energy on the planet, energy levels were different and probably stronger than they are now. And to me, that right away made me think, well, then maybe it was easier for anomalous experiences, anomalous events to happen because there was more energy that people and other beings could just tap right into right away, to make things happen, whether it's levitation or teleportation and just any number of things. Because a lot of these things, and we can get into this like for the rest of the show here, these other abilities. A lot of the articles I saw, they said that levitation as well as telepathy, of course, another word for levitation, it would be telekinesis, but also teleportation. All these, and then of course all the abilities of precognition. But a lot of these things, they're all rooted somehow in the mind and the consciousness. And so to me, that's just really amazing that these are all possibilities that things could have been happening a lot more in the past that that were probably thought of in a lot of cases, not all obviously, but as being just normal or natural at one point anyway, until all that started to slow down and people started thinking differently. I think that all these things are have always been around. It's just that now things are different. There's that level of comfort. We don't need to use these abilities in any way to sort of necessarily help us, or at least that's what we think. A lot of people think. And so there's not as much focus on that, but yet people are still having all these experiences. So that's definitely, I think, a factor in all this. And yeah, that's Herschel in the chat says pole shift probably changes our abilities regarding frequencies. Yeah, I think so too. But I think it is all connected to all the abilities, from the telekinesis to levitation to telepathy to just sensitivity to other energies, other minds, other consciousness. I had a couple experiences over the years where one time I swear I was hearing the thoughts of people. I don't know who they were for sure, but like coming from just out of nowhere, and they were just very mundane thoughts, like I have to go to the store, I want to watch this TV show, that kind of thing. And there were thoughts like in other voices that were not my own, and they just came as I was in a really relaxed state. I wasn't quite sleeping; I was still awake, but I was just really relaxed. I think I was trying to get to the point where I could sleep. So I had that experience a couple of times. I also had an experience where I heard a local radio station playing in my mind, and I think that goes back to those frequencies and people being able to pick up on frequencies. And this is not something I can do regularly, but it's something that has happened a few times, and it just really makes me wonder what was possible way back when.
Oh yeah,
So
for sure. I wonder about the whole gravity thing, playing a big role in it. I mean, we call it gravity, but I mean, you can just look it up right now, and they don't know necessarily. There's not no certainty about exactly what gravity is. There's people have described it in many different ways as being like some type of magnetic field, electromagnetic field, like a static situation, and others have described it as being like a density circumstance. There's something that is lighter than this or heavier than that is how it's all laying out. So there's many different theories. All of them are acceptable for consideration. I don't like the idea that we lock down into one particular idea that may have some fallacy. It'll have a fallacy in it in some way where it won't add up here in these circumstances. So we haven't found anything to distinctively describe natural law as people experience it in those sorts of events. And the best thing they've gotten is to talk about physics and things like that, even though there's something to do with, I think it's apparent natural law that these laws are not set in any kind of stone necessarily. If you look at, for example, Coral Castle and the ability that he had, I think it was Latvian, but he was able to create Coral Castle down in Florida, and in particular that it was certain type of rock that he was using. I think it was Florida, or he was using, I'd have to look it up, I don't have it right off the top of my head, but it was the certain idea that he had the secret to how they would do a lot of the construction work that they did, and it was to do with the fluctuations of the gravitational field of the Earth. What's interesting about that is if you go up into the Ural Mountains out of Russia, that there are accounts of gravitational fluctuations. You can hear about that here in the United States. That there was an account in Missouri of basically it's just a gravitational fluctuation, and it caused a man's roof to come off of his garage. And it was almost like a storm, but it was different than that. There wasn't rain, it wasn't a storm, it wasn't strong winds. It was just a strange movement somehow in the way that the gravitational field was operating on the Earth. So there's a possibility that that could be at play in it, that it may have, I don't know where you would link. You'd call that spontaneous levitation, wouldn't you? It wouldn't be
right.
something that's intentionally controlled one way or the other, but I don't know. I think that in many accounts, the individual is experiencing such things, and we only have history to go off of. There are no modern accounts that we give the same kind of credit to as they used to once do. In the old accounts, they do give account either to some type of a personal ability that they have accessed, where they are able to be affected, and therefore either they are aware that they are doing it or unaware of doing it. In other occasions, it is the effect of contact with some type of outside force, intelligent force that they are in communication with, which is extremely, a lot of times these people, I think they find it fearful. It's described that way, or they have a great deal of confidence in it, but it sounds to be fickle. Like in the instance, like I say, with Simon Magus, it was upholding him for a while, but then again, you wonder if his confidence failed him due to the prayers down below from these other two, most likely magician saints, which is the occasion of it. They were performing miracles. That was the whole point. And that's the whole basis of the magical system that they created, with everything that all of our sciences have developed out of that system. And so it does make you really wonder,
Yeah. So you were right about, let's see here, Edward Lidskinen. He was Latvian American, and he was the creator of Coral Castle. I found the Wikipedia article here on it. This is not going to have everything, but he was able to move these massive stones in a variety of shapes, and but I don't believe he ever let everyone know exactly how he did it. And he did this in a relatively short amount of time as well. So that's a whole other amazing rabbit hole to go into sometime if anyone wants to check that out and go into that. But this does bring us into sort of what we're going to talk about next week, which is the involvement of major organizations, corporations, and governments and militaries in looking into all these abilities and figuring out how they could use them. And I was thinking we could probably put Montauk into that show as well as part of it, since we did talk about it last week.
Oh my God, that sounds like a great idea, James. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so that's something, because these topics do lead into each other very well. Because I mean, like we said last time, if there was, looking at this from like people that maybe have not had any experience with this at all, if they hear that there are all these weird experiences people are having and these abilities that some people have, then, and they are wondering if they're real or not, and they have the resources to investigate that and do experiments and hire scientists to do experiments, then why wouldn't they try to figure out if there is any practical use they could get from these people and these abilities that they seem to have. And then of course that can branch out into all other kinds of areas, as in, like, can anyone have these abilities? How can we make people manifest these abilities? And then how can we use those abilities once they're around? And that's, I mean, Project Montauk there, that we can definitely talk about all the remote viewing stuff. That of course has been released. It's fairly common knowledge now. That's not all classified anymore. I imagine there's still stuff that is classified. I doubt that it's all just out there. And yeah, so that's going to be the next show. And so yeah, this is it's I do think that throughout time people have had abilities, all different kinds of abilities, and whether they're aware of them or not. There were a couple other people that this other article mentioned people that had other abilities, such as let's see here. So this other article is from I gotta scroll up here. It's from Psychologist, but it's spelled a weird way. And this article, the title is "What Historical Figures Are Most Commonly Associated with Psychic Abilities?" And so goes over figures like Nostradamus. Of course, there's been a lot of debate on that. But if there's any accuracy to anything he's ever said, then how did he figure that out? Edgar Casey, And Joan of Arc, going further back, believed to have had visions and communicated with spiritual beings and guiding her actions during her own time. And so there's just all these figures, the Oracle of Delphi, which we've talked about before. And so these are abilities that there's just so many examples of reports of this. That's the thing. There's no way we could ever fit all the examples of all these abilities into one show. It's just too many. And so, as I always say with everything sort of paranormal and my other solo shows, even if there's only a fraction of these examples of these experiences or abilities that people have had throughout time, even if only a fraction is real, then how is it real? And how does it work? And if a fraction is real, then how much more of that fraction, how much of percentage can we extend that to all these other reports that also may be real? So that's why I'm so interested in all these things. So
And
yeah,
that's what
go ahead.
same thing. Same
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that's what drives my continual interest. Fluctuating from being really intense to kind of just casual with it, but just all the different what you described there, and it's the same for me, and I think it's the same for everyone. That there's a continual wonder about how and if, and then just a little bit of pursuing that, and what you find there is enough a lot of times to kind of put people in a sort of, I guess, minorly convinced that there might be, even if it is 5% true, is enough to wonder why. But if it's beyond that, even so, if you look at our current society, it is certainly not geared towards finding out one way or the other. As much as it seems to pretend that it is, there is not a lot of research. But as you're talking about with next week's show, I think that there has been an extreme amount of interest that has been unrevealed to the public, and a lot of findings that have not yet been revealed to the public about these topics. So if the government itself is interested in these things, if the world governments, and whatever you want to call them, certain organizations are very interested in these things, and if there are particular groups that are not just interested, but are actively pursuing it, yet the common public looks at it with a skeptical perspective, they already have one block in the way, is their disbelief. And that is enough most of the time. But yeah, I think so. I think society is geared in that direction to cause that it seems fictitious, even though the truth, it may be much more severe than even we have been told through just television and pop culture. It may be a lot more evolved, a lot more complex than that, for sure.
Yeah, and even it always blows my mind how so much of television and books and comic books and all that stuff is pushed and is coordinated and multimedia. You see that now with like all the stuff from Marvel or DC. That a lot of the comics now, they are directly related to or tie into all the movies and TV shows that they put out now with Marvel and DC. And you have all these stories of all these people with all these abilities, and then you go looking for any kind of similar accounts in the real world, and you find some people that do seem to have some of these abilities at times. And there's just so many accounts of these experiences. I'll just give you all an example. If you all think of all of these shows I've done on experiences on true paranormal stories from the web, all those shows, I imagine I've probably shared hundreds of stories of those kinds of stories now on this show. Let's say we pick on that percentage of 5% of that being real. At this point, that's still tens if not over 100 of these stories that could be real. So, and that's just going a rough figures there off of one single example of trying to gather all these and share them. And so, yeah, I of course that there'd be governments and militaries that would be curious about what they can do with all these things. So, but yeah, I do think, and then I've found it's really hard to completely dismiss everything that's out there when I've had so many of my own experiences, and that also makes it hard to just completely dismiss everything, because then I'd have to completely dismiss everything that I've had happen, and I can't do that. It's just too much. So yeah.
Yeah, same. I mean, eyewitnessing accounts is different. I mean, and you begin to, at first, I mean, in general, it doesn't matter that anyone believes you, and then you know immediately that you shouldn't talk about. But typically, time goes by, and you become kind of more vocal about it, because there's a lot of room between the event that happened and once you're really kind of contemplating it. And it's mostly just I sort of take a stance of, well, I'm not really sure what happened with it. And that puts me pretty comfortable with it, that maybe it was this, maybe it was that, and being okay with any of those. It's extremely difficult to kind of take that notion with it when there were others around that also did witness it. So that was, or reacted to it and had an account of what they noticed. But it's almost impossible to sort of discount it in general. But then to wonder how you would replicate it, or why you would go through the trouble to do so, and if you even could, is really difficult to imagine. It's not fitting into a typical scientific experiment, per se. But I think that in governmental studies, and I hate saying just governmental in general, but in some of the studies that they have done in cyclical research, they are able to some extent replicate that. And if they are able to replicate that, are they implementing it in general society?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good place to leave it for this one, and we'll get right into that topic next time. So, yeah, this is just a minor set of examples of all this. If you all want to look into this more, just look around online. Find articles about all this, and you can find tons of them out there if you look long enough and hard enough. So, but yeah, Jen, thank you for being here as always, and we'll talk to you next weekend.
Talk to you soon. Thank you, James.
Thank you. And yeah, so that's it for tonight. And as I said in the beginning actually before I started recording here, just a quick note for anyone that's listening to these shows. I'm going to be changing up the release schedule a little bit over the next couple weeks. You will all see what that means when I get there. But and we'll go from there. So just don't be surprised if the order of shows and the number of shows released per week for the next couple weeks is a little bit different, because I want to just make things hopefully better than they were before. So everyone take care, and I will talk to you all next time on Salsido Paranormal.